Welcome to SCoT, or welcome again. This is the first SCoT webinar in 2025, and we are happy to be back in this new year video. The list of SCoT webinars in 2025 is ready in our website, and it has been sent to you. Thank you for your interest in community or small community related topics and being with us. Without any ado, as usual, I would like to ask the president of SCoT webinar series, Professor Jafar Jafari, to start the webinar with the opening remarks. Jafar, microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Kazim. Thank you very much, panelists, for a wonderful webinar that we have ahead of us. The subject of overtourism has been all over, but yet it's not a very old concept. It has always been around, but it had no name. The name was actually the name didn't exist in the dictionary until 2018. Oxford Dictionary added overtourism in 2018 to the vocabulary. So the concept has become very deep in many places, but what is very clear, and we will see that in this video, not everybody is looking at overtourism in the same sense. What is overtourism to me may not be overtourism to you. What is overtourism to you may not be overtourism to the hotel manager or airline representative. So overtourism has its own shades of meanings, and we are going to learn about that, about the origin of it, overtourism in the mind of residents in particular. That's the way that literature often reveals overtourism, the voice of the local people, as if only local people are the issue. They are the main issue, of course, but not they're part of the equation. Let's put it this way. So here in this panel, I'm hoping to learn myself about different voices through overtourism, and how these voices can come together for a better understanding of the management of overtourism, how we can avoid it, how we can repair it. I'm pretty sure some of these ideas will be popping up during the presentation. And of course, we have the audience to ask us questions about different issues. Again, overtourism in different countries may have different meanings. So it would be very interesting to learn about different perspectives from different countries as well. So my job today is not to give you a lecture about overtourism, but to be a participant and to learn from each other as what overtourism is, how it is evolving, where it is going, and how we can help to tame it if it needs to be tamed. That's all I would like to say now, and of course I will join you during the discussion and at the end of the webinar as well. Kazem, back to you.
Thank you, Jafar, and thank you all the panelists. So I would like, without any ado, to introduce our moderator today, Professor Harald, and to mention that Harald has moderated a webinar with SCoT before. Harald and his teams are going to cover a very important topic on overtourism. Professor Harald Pechlaner is a professor of tourism, chair of tourism and Center for Entrepreneurship, and since 2023, a founding chair of the School of Transformation and Sustainability at the Catholic University of I don't know if my pronunciation
That's
is
fine.
correct.
Eichstätt, Ingolstadt. It's fine, Kazem.
Thank you. Harald is a key person in the topic, and he doesn't need to be introduced. I think I'm going to pass it on to you, Harald, with your wonderful team and we are very eager to learn from you today.
Yeah, thank you very
Mic
much.
is yours.
Thank you very much, Kazem, Hira, and last but not least, Professor Jafar Jafari. We are honored to be part of a discussion which is, as Professor Jafar Jafari mentioned before, is not coming to an end, but probably also the definitions and the views on this phenomenon are changing. Yeah? Therefore, also the critical question whether people are protesting against or for tourism. Yeah? What is over-tourism? And yeah, let's try to bring forward the idea to expand the definition related to over-tourism. I remember my first SCoT seminar in 21. It was in the middle of the pandemic we had, and the title was "The End of the Excessive Tourism." But when we look at the last years, we did not see the end of excessive tourism, and probably some let me say aspects related to that, what eventually we can call excessive tourism, became then the basis for the development of that what today we call and define over tourism. So this is only a next step now in discussing a phenomenon which is probably linked to several aspects and circumstances which we try to bring out here. Well, the basis of this webinar today is an excursion I made with a group of students from a master's program of the Catholic University of Eichstätt-Ingolstadt in southern Germany. We visited some places on Tenerife Island, on the Canary Islands. We had great discussions and interviews with ministers on one hand, regional conseillers on one hand, but also with the organizers of protests on the other hand. So it was a really interesting experience for all of us. But allow me to say, I'm coming from the Alps, from the European Alps, and Canary Islands may be eventually a good case study for discussing these issues. But the Alps, the European Alps, are in the same situation. Yeah, just a couple of days ago, now anti-tourist protests reach overcrowded European ski resorts, as Italian locals write too much in English on snow under the cable cars. Or a couple of weeks ago, make tourists pay for free office. Office are public transport. So it's a question whether we can include tourists in let me say in the financial issues, in the financial basis of the infrastructure and the services of a destination. So we have all in all some imbalances, I would say, some inequalities and imbalances to manage in many destinations of the world. Eva, after my presentation, will show you some critical issues related to the definition. So over-tourism is not over-tourism, I would say. We have many different views and definitions. Professor Jafar Jafari was mentioning this also right before. Overcrowding is not over-tourism and the other way around. And we have other discussions: tourism acceptance, tourism sentiment, tourism awareness, many definitions around which can eventually help to create a better definition. In 2020, my first book on over-tourism came out. And this was the let me say the outcome of a conference, an international conference we organized in 2017. Yeah? Later, this last year, another book came out, From Overtourism to Sustainability Governance. So we tried to create some, let me say, solutions, potential solutions, with the idea to come out from this over-tourism phenomenon. Destination conscious is another way to go back to let me say, some fundamentals of tourism, which can eventually be helpful in order to create a new understanding of tourism. One aspect I like to underline is the quality of life. So obviously, when we talk about over-tourism, we have to talk about relations between tourists and inhabitants and people living in a region. The local people in relation to tourists, to visitors of a place, of a region, of a destination itself. And obviously, labor markets, housing markets, but then also transportation issues, infrastructural issues, and leisure activities as well, obviously are contributing to the question, what is quality of life and how do we perceive quality of life? Therefore, my understanding is always to create a relation between quality of life on one hand and the quality of experience for tourists and visitors on the other hand. So all in all, let's see what this webinar is bringing out. So I think we have a lot of reasons why we are discussing today about this phenomenon. We have the shrinking availability of living spaces for residents. We have increasing living costs. We have polarized societies. We have shrinking resources, water, for example, the climate change issues. We have a lot of tourism players who are looking at tourism as an economic phenomenon, but probably we should see it much more as a social phenomenon, and so on and so far. A lot of reasons why what we call over-tourism is coming out and bringing us new insights. So thank you very much. In the meantime, I'm honored to have a great panel with me, and so I'd like to give the floor to Eva Erdmenger from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, Dutch. Eva.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a great introduction and really good bridge to my presentation. I will share it with you in a second. And I hope you can see the presentation now. Wonderful. Yes, over-tourism. I will dive right into it. When we see pictures like that, we might be reminded of our last vacation, depending on where you like to travel. This, for instance, was in Rome in 2017, and indeed a quite crowded place, but it was also in the middle of the season. Other images that come to mind are here, for instance, a very popular tourist attraction in Munich, Germany. Again, you see crowds of people, mostly tourists, but we don't know who's a tourist and who isn't. But again, a lot of people looking at the same site. And then we have another image in a case study, which is very much debated when it comes to over-tourism, and that is, for instance, Venice. And here we see people standing on bridges taking images, and we also see the very famous gondola that many tourists want to get on once they are in Venice. So also that is an image that comes to mind when we talk about over-tourism. And with that, I would like to welcome you to my presentation and thank you for inviting me to present about over-tourism. And indeed, I do want to bring a social perspective into the discussion, and more specifically, the social construction of over-tourism and how people perceive that phenomenon. When we look at some figures, and of course we do that, and there are more and more surveys and research projects about over-tourism. And one of the figures that became more popular in the over-tourism debate was the tourism intensity, meaning the overnight stays per capita, so per people living in that certain destination. I brought some figures from 2023, which was, of course, the year where we experienced already a pretty fast recovery from the pandemic, even though it was still in some countries a bit slow, and overseas tourism was also not back on track. But it is still already a pretty recovered travel year. And we see the tourism intensity of different cities, and some of them are very familiar from the overtourism debate, while other cities we have hardly heard about in the overtourism debate. So for instance, when we look at Barcelona, which is next to Venice, one of the more popular overtourism case studies, there is very much in media, in research about overtourism in Barcelona. If we then, for instance, look at Munich, and we do see that the tourism intensity is a bit lower than in Barcelona, but not very much. There are media reports, and I excuse for the German, but there simply are no English-speaking or international media reports about overtourism in Munich. What it says here is that tourism in Munich is booming, but not as much as in Barcelona, which is, if you just look at the tourism intensity, true. But it's still surprising that the perception is so different, even though the figures are so close to each other. So what does overtourism actually mean? And is a single person in a spot and in a destination, and here it could be a famous waterfall in Iceland, is that overtourism or not? And that very much depends on the perception of the person looking at it. So I brought also some definitions of overtourism, and I highlighted what I want you to focus on. So in the first definition, which is one of the often used one from Goodwin, is including that it's about too many visitors. Then we have the definition from the UNWTO, now UN Tourism, which starts with the maximum number of people. And then we have another definition from researchers who are also very much diving into the overtourism debate, Milano et al. And they include also that it's in excessive growth of visitors and that there's overcrowding in areas. So what happened after those definitions came up is that people started to search for the carrying capacity of a destination. Too many visitors, maximum number of people, overcrowding. That means probably, that were the first thoughts and impressions, that there is a certain threshold, and when we pass that one, we do have overtourism. But if I zoom out of this waterfall, for instance, and we see it's actually not that packed with people, and maybe the people present are not disturbed by the amount of other tourists around them, but it could still be a place where someone experiences and perceives overtourism. So is it really a search for a carrying capacity and a threshold number? Or do we have to reread the definitions and focus on the other parts that are also included instead of just making quick assumptions about a carrying capacity? So it is about a feeling, it is about quality of life, it is about the quality of experience, as Harald also just mentioned. It's about the quality of visitor satisfaction, and it is about suffering residents from certain consequences of this crowding. It is about the general well-being and about the lifestyle of people involved. So there is more to it than just the overcrowding that overtourism often is reduced to. So if you look at this massive table, what I want to point out is that overcrowding is one of the impacts, and you could even transfer it also to the sociocultural impact, of course. These boundaries are not hard, and I just want to underline there is a whole lot of impact. It's not just overcrowding. So when we look at this picture, and it seems like we have a mix of people who have been to work, people who are traveling around, and use one of the smaller taxi boats in Venice. So not a very touristy boat, but again, probably a good low-budget transportation mode for tourists as well. Is this overtourism? And again, I do want to bring the social perspective into discussion. So I will show you now a couple of quotes from residents, which I have interviewed in focus group discussions in my research. And I do want to underline that those quotes are all from Copenhagen, but they do match, and you will see it now with the pictures that I show from different destinations. So again, here we have, for instance, a person who talks about seeing more and more tourists and an intense increase of tourism in the person's surrounding. And what I would like you to put your emphasis on is that it is the feeling of traffic becoming too heavy and that the person cannot navigate around as the person did a couple of years ago. So traffic just becoming very heavy and not being able to operate as the person used to. And that is probably something that the people on this boat who live in Venice perceive as well. When we look at another example and another phenomenon that's often connected with overtourism is Airbnb and the peer-to-peer platform accommodations. Here an image from Marseille, and again a quote from Copenhagen, which just matches what we experienced in Marseille as well, is that the person who lives in the city center or in a quarter which is very famous among tourists, specifically off the beaten track and new urban tourists, feels like an animal in this zoo. So the person is sitting on her terrace and is enjoying herself at the weekends, and at the same time experiences that tourists who live in the Airbnb apartment above or next to her take pictures of her because she looks so stereotypical Danish, and it's just this hygge lifestyle that she's expressing with her Saturday morning atmosphere. And she's not being asked that these pictures can be taken from her or not. She just becomes this animal in the zoo of people who are not respecting her privacy. And then I have a third example. And again, the quote from Copenhagen matches what I observed in Portugal, Lagos. And here the person said that it's very much a political matter. And I was very surprised, honestly, that some of the residents I spoke to had this mindset, because it is already going a bit deeper. And it is about political unsatisfaction, dissatisfaction of residents. So the person said it is the money talk. Like political matter, meaning the money is supported, the economic development is supported, but they're not listening to us. They're prioritizing the economy before the people living in the destination. And that is not just limited to Copenhagen, as the picture shows. And even on the roof of this empty hotel building, which has been abolished, says reclaim your city. So how do residents construct overtourism? And I briefly want to show how I decoded such quotes that I got. So I'm briefly going to read out the quote. So I think when I told you before that I actually love meeting the tourists in the church Absalon, and that's a community center in Copenhagen. It's not a church where Christian service is held anymore, because they sort of blend in with the local community, how it lives, how we live. Then I think it is very positive. But when they enter as tourists and make noise, and also because of the increase of tourists and tourism in general, lots of more bars and restaurants has opened. And that makes a lot of noise. And that way, especially in the summertime, I am affected by that. But I like it when they come, you know, by bike, on foot, like we do, like the locals do. So what I read is emotions that are being expressed is that the person actually loves meeting tourists under certain circumstances, but that the person also feels affected if those circumstances are not met. Then it's about the alienation, which is often part of the overtourism debate. So the person appreciates those tourists who blend in with the local culture, who acts like the locals do. Then we have, which is also often mentioned, visible and audible triggers on how people think they perceive tourists, even though they don't know for a fact if it's a tourist or not. For here, for instance, it is noise. Could also be local people partying at night, but if it's increasing and in English, it is often perceived as tourists. Then we have a quantitative capacity related aspect, so the pure increasing and crowding aspects. And the disturbing, so where the person feels like, I do not like this. And that is, in this case, again, the noise that is being mentioned. So when we look at how they construct overtourism from different perspectives, and in this case, residents' perspectives, we hear words like traffic noise and higher prices. What is hiding behind that is an influence on the daily life, and again, an influence on freedom. And we can continue this breaking down on different levels. So for instance, different clothing, language, and movement are a certain cultural and lifestyle gap, and people often relate it to their identity being threatened. Then we have the Airbnb debate and peer-to-peer rental platform debate. We have spatial distribution and tourists coming into my backyard. And therewith, we have a discussion about spatial proximity, which relates to the privacy of people. And then we have topics like traffic, drugs, and pollution, which can create health and safety risk, and therewith also affect the safety of residents. So in many cases, what people are telling us when we speak to them, how they perceive tourism, they're talking about direct and indirect influences on their actual human needs. So I ask the people that I talk to, what is your tolerance limit? What would have to happen so that you are passing this threshold of, okay, now it's for me overtourism. And you see a word cloud, but crowd is yelling at us already. And the larger the word, the more often it has been mentioned. And we see quite many different aspects. We see misbehavior quite large. We see privacy quite large. But again, let's look at what is hiding behind those words. So for crowds, for instance, it is a spatial proximity. Like many people do not like it when they are in crowds, and literally in crowds, and that people are very close to them or on their biking path or whatever. Then we have the human needs affected, which is what I just showed. We also have, and that is something that we really need to underline, a lot of effects of urbanization and societal developments detached from the tourism development. So many effects that are connected to overtourism would have happened to a certain extent due to societal and urban development. Then we have the fear of alienation, which is a discussion that we are also extending to migrant debates and refugees. Then we have the economic perspective, economic boosterism, growth orientation, which is not just by the economy itself, where it's understandable to some extent, but also often connected to governments and governance. Then we have multiple carrying capacities, so not just the physical one, how many people fit a bus, but also perceptual, social, etc. We have the high vulnerability and low resilience, which can, for instance, be the difference between Munich and Barcelona. And we do also have a capitalist consumer behavior, which is often not perceived positive by people living in destinations. So to show you another picture from Munich, in this case, we see so-called beer bikes. So a group of people, and again, we do not know if it's tourists or if it's people from Munich, who are sitting on a bike, drinking beer and cycling around the city. And that is just one of those examples that people bring up when you talk to them, like, what kind of tourism do you not like? And they often describe tourism like that. But again, the resident's perspective is not the only perspective. So I brought another one, and I brought a quote from the head of Munich's Department of Labor and Economy. And that person said in an interview, that's one of the most awful words to me. And he's referring to overtourism, not to beer bikes. I'm happy about every tourist who comes, and I will never become tired of telling everyone I don't want to scare people off with the word overtourism. I think that's a signal to our guests who have a lot of money and a lot of reputation to bring to us. And while I understand that the person from his position is scared of negative repetition, I am scared that this person is not listening to the people and what they're actually saying as soon as he hears the word overtourism. So on top of all of that, there is probably a very large issue which is related to a very neoliberal and growth-driven destination governance or even non-governance. And then suddenly came the pandemic and the tourists flew out and the problem seemed to be solved. And the UNWTO or UN Tourism, they took the initiative to call us for building back better. And they wanted us to rethink tourism to contribute to people and planet for a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient tourism sector. 5 years later, the UN Tourism also says that international tourism recovers to pre-pandemic levels in 2024. They're very happy about it. You find a long article about different statistics and recovery quotes, and they conclude with a positive outlook for 2025, points to continued growth. So instead of rebuilding better, it is building back business as usual. And when we look at the overtourism debate and the attention it gets, it increases massively in 2024, and we can expect the same for this summer. So when you look at media articles about it, and here a screenshot just from yesterday for 3 different terms, because overtourism is not the same term in different countries. We also, for instance, work with tourism phobia and a Japanese term, which I cannot pronounce or I don't dare to pronounce. You do find increasing articles popping up every day about the debate. And that has a massive influence on how people and residents shape their own social construct. So overtourism is a term, it is a tool for a phenomenon that impacted people perceive, which is influenced by external and internal factors. It is something they often cannot define because they are not experts or educated about it. They just perceive negative impacts. So they need to speak about it, or rather they need to be heard speaking about it. And that is why I want to conclude that overtourism is indeed a term that we need to listen to, that we need to understand and look behind, and it's important that we understand the meaning of overtourism for the people who are impacted. And I thank you for listening to me, and I do want to inform you that I will have a book being published this summer about it, which also includes some aspects which are often lacking in the overtourism debate. For instance, looking at the global south, so expanding the Eurocentric perspective, also looking at rural areas, smart solutions, degrowth debate. And I included also impulses and inspirations for a change to have a bit of a positive sprinkle on this very heavy topic. And I thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva, for the great presentation. This is definitely helpful for, let me say, have a good basis for the discussion later and for the definition of that, what we call overtourism. Thank you very much. So let's move now to Katrin and Jakob. I'm proud that I can show and see a presentation, listen a presentation of my students. As mentioned before, we organized a student study at the Canary Islands, and what they do is now give us an insight into first results and preliminary results of a small study. Katrin and Jakob, the floor is yours.
Yes, Harald, thank you so much for your introduction, and also thank you guys for having us. Also very warm welcome from my side. My name is Katrin, and today myself and my fellow student Jacob are going to present our preliminary study on protests related to tourism, especially on Tenerife, as Harald just mentioned. Just to give you guys a short idea of who we are master's students of the new master's program named Transformation and Sustainable Habitat Development, Redesigning Tourism of the Catholic University of Eichstätt in Ingolstadt. And we had the pleasure to go on this insightful excursion last October to Tenerife. In this presentation, we aim to understand whether people are protesting against or for tourism. I would say before we start right into it, I'm going to give you guys a bit of an overview about protests and its protest culture, then give you guys the key factors of Excursion, and then Jakob is going to deep dive into Excursion and will tell you guys more about it. But let's start by understanding the fundamental concept of protest and protest culture. Jakob, if you can go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So protests are a powerful tool, especially for those who lack direct political influence. They serve as a means for people to challenge decisions, express their dissatisfaction, and also to push for change overall. Protests can occur in many different fields, for example, political, social, cultural, and economical. They can arise in response to, for example, government decisions, regimes, also to climate policies, pandemic restrictions, and also migration policies. Now, protests can also be in very different forms. One more back, Jakob. Thank you. They can come in different forms, like they can be individual, they can come as a group, as a collective, they can be very short-lived, or they can be very long-lasting, they can be peaceful, or they can be radicalized, and that meaning it can be violent, but it needs a minimal structure, otherwise it either fades or it escalates. So here in the slide on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of protests back in 2022 in Berlin. They were sitting on the street and blocking the cars at the Berlin Central Station. Under that, you can see protesters in Hungary holding up their mobile phones, protesting against internet taxation in 2018. But now let's explore more the protest culture and the changes of the 21st century. Next slide, please. Perfect. So before I start and talking about the dynamics of protest culture in 2021, I would like to highlight that it is about post-industrial Western society, just to have that in mind. In today's world, protests are really part of everyday's life. Protests are more frequent, more diverse, and also more widely supported than ever. Also, they're no longer limited to just specific groups of people. Protesters can come from any educational background or any political ideologist. One key shift is the blurring of boundaries between protest movement and politics. A very good example for that is the Pegida movement in Germany, which started as an anti-immigration protest, but it evolved more and more towards a political movement. Another notable change is the variety of protests. Of course, we still have traditional street protests, but social media has really changed the whole culture and also given protests a new platform. For example, Fridays for Future or the Me Too movement got really big due to social media. Social media also enables flash mobs, online petitions. You can post on X or any other social media platform and therefore have digital activism. However, it is important to notice that, of course, radical protests and violent protests, unfortunately, are still remaining in the present. The impact of protests are closely linked to how much attention it gets, which in our world today is which is flooded with information. It can be really hard to gain momentum and also to maintain it in the public focus. And that, like I said, has become a very big issue for protest movements. Here on the right-hand side, you can see an AfD demonstration in Berlin back in 2015. And underneath that, you can see a flash mob in New York City that was for the victims of Newton of 2013. Now, this brings us to the question, how does protest actually relate to tourism? The next slide. So tourism is a vital industry, but in some destinations it has become a source of conflict rather than a driver of prosperity. So some protesters are focusing on overcrowding and overtourism, where too many visitors strain local infrastructure. Then others see tourism as a symbol of a bigger issue, more of a social problem, where, for example, because of rising living costs or environmental damage. And then one key question is, are these challenges controllable, or do they follow their own self-reinforcing dynamics? So a great example here are the Canary Islands, particularly in our case, Tenerife, where local protesters have gained momentum. So in October 2024, One of the demonstrations took place in Las Americas in Tenerife, where you can see the picture on the right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, you can see a picture of the protests on the Canary Islands, where the movement started back in April of 2024. With this in mind, let's now take a closer look at our excursion and the insights that we gained from our excursion. So the aim and methodology was to gain a deeper understanding of the protests in Tenerife. We conducted a preliminary study with an explanatory character with first insights in order to understand the tourism, the type of tourism and beyond of that. So it took place in October 16th until the 21st on 2024. Part of the group were Jacob, myself, and 5 fellow students, and then our professor, Hara Pechlana. Our goal was to have a direct dialogue with protesters and also with tourism stakeholders to get a better understanding of the protests and where they're coming from. Now, the way we were doing it was a multi-method. We did some interviews, we had observations, and we also had press interviews. Now, moving on to the interviews. Next slide, please. How many conversations have taken place and with whom? We were quite busy in those 6 days. We actually had 5 interviews. Guided interviews. First, we talked to the tourism director of Arona. Then the next day, we talked to representatives of the hotel industry, Ars Hotel. Then we talked to activist groups. We also talked to Turismo de Islas Canarias. And then 5th, talked to the regional Ministry of Tourism of the Canary Islands. The focus of the questions that we asked all of these people were the motives of the protests, the goal, and also the organization of the protests. But also has to be said that when we did those interviews, all of the people were really kind. They were happy to answer our question, and it felt like they were really excited about that. People were there and listening and actually trying to look deeper into it. And now I'm already giving the word to Jacob, who's going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into our excursion.
Thanks, Katrin. Let's look at some of the results from the interviews from the activist perspective first. The main points of criticism were the environmental destruction, which included the construction projects, also the housing shortage due to vacation apartments, especially for tourism employees, the lack of possibilities to get involved in tourism and regional development, the unfair distribution of tourism profits, and also water scarcity. The goal, according to the activists, the goal of the movement is to limit mass tourism and support sustainable alternatives. And a key takeaway for us was that they are mainly not against the tourists. But let's take a dive a bit deeper into the interviews. For this, we used a tool called GABEC. GABEC is a qualitative research method designed to holistically analyze and manage complex information. And by organizing, visualizing, and interpreting large sets of narrative data. For this, we transcribed, coded, and analyzed these interviews to visualize them and put them into a meaningful context. So here you can see the terms in gray. The terms in gray are used in a broader context. They imply the urgency as they are more frequently used in the interviews. So here we have terms like illegal projects, stops, limits, and Canary Islands, of course, in the middle. And then you can see the connection between these terms and words. For example, the connection between Canary Islands, limits, and stops indicate a strong emphasis on the need to recognize the scarcity of resources and space on the Canary Islands. Another connection would be, for example, stop, limits, limited space, and illegal projects, zero growth, for example. These underscores the urgency in addressing overdevelopment concerns of the activists. Another linkage would be, for example, tourism and economics, massification of the population and destruction, which you can see kind of in the middle on the right side. Yeah, this suggests a complex relationship between the economic benefits and the impacts of tourism on the Canary Islands. Okay, now let's look at some of the results with the tourism stakeholders, or from the interviews with the tourism stakeholders. The main focus of the tourism stakeholders is to increase quality and not the quantity. So they want to focus more on the quality side of the tourism. Yeah, they see the problems, and they see the following problems on the Canary Islands. They see the uncontrolled growth of vacational apartments, the neglect of development of social housing projects, especially for tourism employees, the burden from traffic and infrastructure, including traffic jams, the uncontrolled use of water, yeah, and the income from the tourism industry that often leaves the country. Their solutions include promoting local economy, sustainability projects, for example, Comunidades Turísticas Circulares, which is a circular tourist community, to improve public transport, social housing projects, and introducing a legal framework regulating the vacational renting on the Canary Islands. We also had some on-site observations. We inspected hotel constructions, and during our visit, we also looked at some graffitis that were in front of these hotel constructions. One of that said, "Tourists go home," which is a pretty bold statement. And observations during the protests also included that the participants of the protests were heterogeneous. There were activist groups, workers, and the local populations that participated in the protests. And the demands during the protests were mainly a new tourism model for the Canary Islands. But yeah, we came up with the question: is more sustainable tourism instead of mass tourism, or sustainable mass tourism? And yeah, the challenge that arises from these demands are the radicalization and the coordination of the problems of these protests. Now let's get to a reflection on the protests. Yeah, our reflection of the protests is that the strength of the protests are that they link ecological and social issues together and make a strong statement regarding the tourism issues on the Canary Islands. They also generate awareness for tourists to treat the destination more sustainably. We saw weaknesses in the protests as some of the demands were unspecific and they had internal conflicts between the groups that were protesting. And also the communication between politics and demonstrators were missing, as the demonstration took place next to the beach and not in front of the mayor's office or the political houses. So we identified that initially the protests started with protest of tourism workers against the housing shortage and the outdated infrastructure on the Canary Island and all the problems that come with that. But the protests kind of shifted the focus to the general dissatisfaction with the government policies, like corruption and other issues that the government had. So with all this in mind, we have some follow-up questions that we came up with that are interesting to look at, which are also great for our short discussion. I'm not sure if it's right after our part or later. But yeah, some questions are: how can tourism contribute to solving local problems? And what role do local and global actors play in this context? How can communication between protesters and politicians be improved? And are the protests really addressing tourism, or rather social inequality and injustice? And another question was, can tourism in the Canary Islands be made more sustainable in the long term? Yeah, with this, we're concluding our little presentation about our excursion.
Yeah, thank you very much to Katrin and Jakob for giving us these insights into this study. I guess this can also be a good basis for the later discussion at the same time. So please download your presentation. I give the floor to Antonio Garzon, he helped us, and I have to say thank you very much in organizing this excursion. This is the opportunity now to say thank you very much to you, Antonio. So let's start. The floor is yours. We should not lose time because at 11 we have to start with the discussion.
Thank you, Harald, and thank you for inviting me to participate in the project and in this webinar today. I will be very, very quick. Just a few minutes. There are eight slides. I think maybe now you should see it. Yes. The question, are people protesting against or for tourism? I will focus on the study of the Canary Islands on Tenerife, or on the Canary Islands in global, and in what kind of tourism, over-tourism we are facing. If we speak about over-tourism, we speak about the carrying capacities, mostly the 5. In the 80s, it was more the ecological, but now we're seeing all centered more on the social and the psychological, the perceptual of the tourists, no? They came the overcrowding. It began with overcrowding, as we saw the definition previously, in urban tourism, with the top 4, Dubrovnik, especially Venice, Amsterdam, and Barcelona. But the question, this was 10 years ago. I put here until 19 because there were measures taken against the overcrowding, very specific measures. It doesn't mean that it stopped there. But the question was, it was especially in the social carrying capacity and in the perceptual carrying capacity. The question was, what happened with the sun and beach? The sun and beach, at this time, there were no symptoms, but later in the post-COVID, it went very quick. And we came to what happened last year here in the Canary Islands. There was as well the infrastructural carrying capacity touched, but especially this too, the infrastructural saturation of the highways, especially for the residents. And for me, the biggest point, the housing, the shortage of housing. So,
Antonio, probably you are on the next slide, so we do not see the let me say, the forthcoming slides. Please make presentation mode. Otherwise, we can't see when you go to the next slide.
Sorry. So that was the wrong.
But it's also okay if you do not use slides, just in case. Okay, now it's working. Thank you.
Yeah, now it's working. Okay, thank you. Yeah. You see, the two main ones is the infrastructural and the social. You see, both are not things that can be solved from one day to another. So in this case, over-tourism is a result of under-management and under-investment during a long time, many years, decades. And this is the outcome now. Now let's have a quick look about what happened here last year. The 20th April was the start. The participant official were over 50,000 people on the street protesting. This is 2.5% of the population. But that doesn't mean that only the people protesting are the center. Now we will come to it, no? This was the picture of the 20th April. Now we come to the picture of the 20th October, and more focused on the effects. You see many hotels, saturated highways, and they were less, just 10,000 people, 0.4% of the population. So let's now come. Who are they? Who is leading the protest, and are they really against or for tourism? If we see the Canarian society, I hope you're seeing well the picture now. Here we have, they are 0.4% of the society, but that doesn't mean that they are the only ones who are protesting or feel identified with it. No, what did they achieve? They achieved, well, at first it was for the first time a protest against the whole economic system. This was not before. The ecological groups, they are not new. They come from the 60s, from the beginning of tourism, they are there. But they achieved, they protested against the whole system. Here I have to make a quick insight. The Canary Islands depend totally on tourism. We have a dependence of the job of 29% of direct jobs from tourism. If we take the indirect job, we go to 40%, but we have not to forget the induced jobs. There we got almost to 90%. So if we see what they achieved to socialize ecological problems. The core of them is ecologicals, but they socialized them, they politicized them, they went very quickly to politics, and they linked with democratic problems. And so they achieved participation of much more society who felt identified, especially because the two items are the two hot points here, the burning issues are the infrastructures and especially the shortage of housing. As well, they achieved a democratic problem, the salaries, they say it's not according, but there's a purchase power. It depends on the salary itself, but on the rise of the prices of the housing. And more, this is the problem in this case. So are they against? Maybe the core is mostly against, but the whole who feel identified are more against how tourism is managed. And there is a difference to be against tourism or how the tourism is managed. So quickly, what happened between the 6 months, between the 20th April and October? Basically, there happened nothing. The infrastructures and the housing, this is not a problem to solve in one day. There was not enough time to see result of this. But in politics, there were desperate reactions to achieve short-term headlines, trying to implement a tourism tax or reduce the building. This is a positive to reduce the time of building of new houses, because the license actually takes 2 or 3 years only to get the license, and now they will reduce to 3 or 4 months. This could have been done before, obviously. And the undermanagement goes to a strategic management, but not in response of this movement, but already since 2023, where the vacational renting is begun to be regulated. No? And what happened with the movement of the 20th of April, they were unable in this 6 months to organize a stable project and to coordinate all these different groups, because it's not only one group. There, in Tenerife, for example, there were 17 different groups. And so what happens for the wars, the individual radical members took initiative, and this is not good. So we have a quick look on what they identified as a problem. The title is Canary Islands Have a Limit, and the problems 10. The main group, Ben Magic, has a decalogue with 10. Six of the problems identified are poor ecological, and 4 are social and economic. The most important, the housing shortage in this case. And there come a lot of measures to be taken, and they are related to the identified problems. There will be no time to analyze all. I selected 2. I will overgo. I took one of ecologic. I will overgo this and go straight to the next. We go to the housing shortage. They identified this problem. This is correct. This is obvious. There is a housing shortage. The associated cause is due to holiday rentals, non-resident buying homes. This is very simple. This is too imprecise and subjective because there are more causes. Of course, it's true. The holiday rental expanded a lot, and non-resident buying homes as well. But as well, there were no social houses built since 20 years, for example. No? Here we have the evolution of the tourism beds. And here you can see these are the some of the traditional beds in green. Actually, they go down. It's not they are not more. They go down. And here you see 45. Here the vacational renting. So 45% of the actual offer is vacational renting, and this is too much. This is unsustainable for the tourism destination to have 45% of the accommodation in private single hands. And so the measures provided, they are as well very imprecise. So it's 10. I come to the conclusions very quickly. Protest against tourism, no, mostly against the way tourism is managed. What kind of over-tourism we are facing? Of course, the consequences of long-term undermanagement. No? So each of the 5 carrying capacities are somehow touched. Some indicators are touched. In my opinion, if one indicator of one carrying capacity is touched, we can speak already about over-tourism. In this case, especially the social. Here, I just want to remember Professor Jafari was coming the last 10 years to a congress here in Maspalomas in Gran Canaria, and every year he presented and he advised to make follow-up of the residents with interviews every year to see how they feel, how long they take to go to work, and so you can react. This was not done. And from this we learn tourist destination grows, the hotels grows, the tourist number grows. We have to develop accordingly the infrastructures, the housing, and the training, especially as well the training of the staff. If this is not done, if there is a gap between this, then it comes up to what we have here, what happened in Tenerife. And this is the picture that went to all the press in Europe, what we classify here of our picture of shame. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antonio Garzón Beckmann. Well, what kind of overtourism? That was a question. And well, you related the overtourism phenomenon also with the managerial aspect. So you were talking about undermanagement. So thank you very much also for this view, which is absolutely important, just to bring together now the social phenomenon with the economic phenomenon and the managerial aspects related to both of that phenomenon. Thank you very much for all the presentations. Now we start with the discussion. The first discussant will be Carmelo León. He's a professor of Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. Thank you, Carmelo, for joining this webinar. Please start with a short discussion, just in order to give also to the audience the opportunity to make questions. Carmelo. Please, Carmelo, we can't hear you. So,
yes.
Thank you.
No, okay. Thank you. Good morning, Harald. It's a great pleasure to meet you, all of you, this distinguished panel this morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a very good presentations about the overtourism problem and the Canary Islands situation, and there is little more than I can add to this overall discussion, very in-depth presentations with all the aspects that are generating around the problem of overtourism and the situation in the Canary Islands, and as a case study that can set up important principles for driving the management of overtourism across many destinations around the world. I would just like to point out a historical perspective on this that also Antonio has brought about a little bit. As you know, the Canary Islands has been a very successful tourist destination, attracting a lot of tourists. But the concern for the environment has been always there, and there has been a lot of political pressures for managing the natural ecosystem and landscapes and regulating the use of the territory for tourism. So this strong regulation tried to limit the numbers of tourism, and the growth of tourism in the last decade has been stimulated by the increase in the rental vacation that now, as Antonio pointed out, represents more than 35% of the total supply of about 500,000 units of beds in the islands. So this is a lot of pressure on the housing markets, because most of the pressure has been in the urban areas, although the vacation rentals have also been implemented in the rural and touristic areas, of course. But this pressure has, of course, a rise in prices, contributed to the rise in prices for renting and buying of the local population, together with the shortage in the housing market that is also a problem in all developed economies around Europe. So what happens is that this claim has been embraced by the environmental groups that also had been working strongly against the tourism sector, because the pressure it has on the environmental assets that the Canary Islands is very valuable. So there are many problems in the islands that have revolved around this movement. And we have to take into account that also the Canary Islands is a laggard economy. Its performance in terms of GDP per capita is not outstanding. Actually, it ranks in the lowest levels of the Spanish regions and are across Europe. Also, unemployment is higher than in other regions in Spain. And if we compare the unemployment rate with other tourist destinations, is higher as well than other tourist destinations that are also successful attracting tourists. So the question is why tourism has not been able to rise the unemployment rate, to bring quality employment to the local population, such as it has happened in other destinations. So these economic conditions we can add to the social exclusion and the poverty rates are also lower. We have a higher economic lower levels of economic conditions in terms of poverty and social exclusion than in other areas of Spain and Europe. So these economic conditions explain a malaise in the complaint of the local population. Tourism is becoming the culprit of these economic disadvantages. And what is happening is that we have an economic development that is not bringing prosperity to all the people in the territory. The development that is supposed to be bringing tourism. So the question in terms of over-tourism is also a question of social carrying capacity, of bringing a balance and equilibrium in terms of physical, natural, environmental and human aspects of tourism altogether, as you have also explained brilliantly, have to be balanced in terms of social equilibrium, because this is overpassed when tourists add more damages to the benefits than the benefits that added to the local residents in the islands. If we think of this over-tourism, it's not widespread across the perception, is not widespread across all the population, since only a minority of the general population are manifest or claim that tourism is not good for the development of the islands. And the large majority, I'm talking about 85% of people in the populations in the islands are for tourism and not against tourism. So as the speakers have presented the protests, and Antonio has also pointed out brilliantly, the protests have been misplaced completely. There is a misunderstanding of what is the role of tourism, the contributions that tourism make to the welfare of the local population and the development of the islands, and should be placed, the complaints should be placed in a more general context, that the economic model and its performance is not at the standards that should be, and the policymakers are not having a good resource for the welfare and the well-being of the local populations. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Carmelo. Leon, thank you very much for these insights. It was really interesting to know that the unemployment rate on Canary Islands is higher than in other regions, also touristic regions of Spain. So this is, we all know that the Canary Islands are in a very, very unique situation and position, far away from the continental area and having a certain autonomy in developing their islands in a different way. But this is an interesting aspect. And the other aspect, you were talking at the end of your discussion about the misunderstanding. Probably everything is a misunderstanding. Well, Jakob showed us that what we saw is that so probably one of the messages of the students' presentation was that people have to, so all the responsible people have to create, let me say, not only a working group, but a task, let me say, a platform where they have to start a strong discussion. Our impression, protesters say politicians are not talking with us. Politicians say protesters are not talking with us. And so everyone is saying that no one is talking with the other one. So this is something also, there is also some mismanagement of communication. eventually. I don't know whether this is a very practical insight in our interviews also. Yeah? We all know about the problems, we all know about potential solutions, but it is about a misinterpretation of the starting point of the discussion. And thank you very much, therefore, for this insight, also based on Antonio's presentation. Yeah? Well, are there any questions? Paolo Zhang, for example, thank you for your insights. How do you view the strategy of prioritizing high-spending, well-behaved tourists as a means of controlling visitor numbers and focusing on quality over quantity? I don't know, Antonio or Carmelo, probably you could give a short answer to that question. Yeah? Ahmad Sheikhi is then talking about sustainable tourism, which emphasizes community involvement, yet many destinations struggle to integrate local voices into decision-making. Again, that's what I mentioned before. Who is talking with whom? So how can we create, let me say, an involvement of voices, different voices, just in order to clarify what over-tourism is, just in order to clarify why we have certain developments, what are the reasons for. So when I look at the different presentations here, definitely we see that we have different views, and on a high touristified island, this is probably even more creating pressure. So what are some successful models or strategies you have seen that effectively include local residents in tourism planning and governance? Who wants to say something? Antonio and Carmelo, the first question is probably also a little bit focusing on the case in its own.
Well, just to the question about quantity before quality before quantity, this is an eternal discussion here. There was always the demand, less tourists, but that they pay more. But there was no strategy attached to transform a destination of 60 years to get more in the luxury segment, in the more with a more purchase of buying purchase is very, very difficult if there are no investments done. No, there must be a lot of investment in infrastructures, and then you slowly can. But you cannot change a tourism model. You can change how the tourism model is managed, but you cannot change the core. And the core is that the Canary Islands are working on a segment of tourists of the middle level and on mass tourism. There was always in all this last months speaking about mass tourism as something negative. Mass tourism is not negative. In the Canary Islands, we live from mass tourism. Mass tourism is understanding as a tourism industry. In contradiction to exclusive tourism. Mass tourism is not negative as long as it's managed in a sustainable way. What is negative is massive tourism when it goes to over-tourism. No? So it's difficult to go to the argument, let's get the half number of tourists, but they pay the double. This argument they said many times here, but this is impossible after 60 years development.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I would like to add to this discussion that the concern for quality, as I said earlier, has been always present in the islands. We have tried to limit the numbers. We could have today 30 million tourists a year. We are reaching 17, 18 million tourists a year. But there has been always a restriction in growth. And the numbers have been very much monitored by the politicians in order not to occupy sensible areas of the territory. So it's been always present, the concern about the numbers. And the environmental lobbies have a lot of hand in this. They have been very effective in restricting growth, and there has been a strong battle between the entrepreneurship and the firms, touristic companies trying to develop, and these environmental groups opposing these developments. So this being all the time a conflict, it would be nice to relate all this history of battles for the territory in the Canary Islands.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move to the second questions by Ahmad Sheikhi. So how integrate local voices into decision making? Allow me to say, when I see also the cases of the Alpine Alps, as I showed it in my presentation before, I never see that, let me say, responsibles of the tourism management system or the DMOs or even the politicians who are responsible for tourism affairs are actively talking with the protesters. Should they do that? Or should they try to avoid it, because protesters probably are a bit unorganized, and you probably you have then unexpected situations. But that's what I also see in the Alps. So people are protesting, and probably they have reasons for. Katrin and Jakob were showing that. But how can we integrate these local voices into the decision making? Carmelo.
Well, I just very much like the presentation by Karen about this protest culture. It's a very good foundation. I mean, protest is becoming fashionable and very easy through this social media. So if you have a claim and want to make it public, and you can make a boomerang very easily with this claim, whatever it is. It has happened with other issues. So yes, protests are sometimes they are founded, sometimes are not so founded, but they come out to society, and what society has to know and to understand is what kind of protests are really valuable and useful, and how to engage those protests in different ways. What is happening is that communication, the way communication is flowing in societies is being nuisance. In a way, it's being influenced it can be influenced in a perverse way. So where is the truth? What is the balance? Where is the foundations of good communication, and to communicate in a friendly way issues and in constructive ways. So this is a task, a challenge for societies, and tourism as an industry of peace and tranquility could also contribute to this, because we don't like fights in the world. There are too many fights right now, and we need peace. We need people to understand together and to come across solutions. And as you said, that it's very important that politicians address another way of engaging social people and people in societies. There is a crisis in political systems across the world, and the tourism industry is also receiving this crisis alongside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Carmelo, for these clear words. Well, we are talking about inequalities, and we are talking about imbalances at the end of the day. And what we see now is that tourism is a catalyst for imbalances, social imbalances, economic imbalances, environmental imbalances, and the mix of all these imbalances are creating this fears, are creating then this protest movements as discussed before. This is only one perspective how we can see the discussion on overtourism. Let me just come back shortly to Antonio's discussion. He was talking about mass tourism is not bad. Well, I basically would agree on that. And in the SCoT's webinar of 21, when we were talking about excessive tourism, we had also David Weaver from Australia with us, and he developed this model of sustainable mass tourism. I agree basically on that. Mass tourism is demonized in a way, and is obviously for many societies and people a bad word. But definitely there is a difference between the quantitative view on mass tourism and the qualitative view on mass tourism. Mass tourism can be a model, a business model. Well, eventually you can also change the business model, because we all know that in a mass tourism business model, profits are not always distributed between locals and others in a let me say in a specific way, which creates then also satisfaction. This is probably there what we have to do in this democratic context, which we are discussing here. Yeah, thank you. There are other questions now coming in. ISAAC, I heard from one of the presenters that 45% of accommodation is provided by private individuals. Is this really a bad thing? Because I am from Ghana and we encourage private participation in tourism development. Yes, I guess we discussed it also. What we are discussing here, students who were presenting this, Eva was showing this. We are obviously part of a specific governmental model of a specific economic model. We are talking about democracies, we are talking about capitalism, and obviously over-tourism issues we are discussing in this context. So, but we all know that we have also other contexts. So, Eva, just a short sentence on that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good comment to again remind us that we have a very Eurocentric perspective in general in the over-tourism debate. And of course, also representing the case studies that we brought to the discussion today. But yes, we do have to think broader if we want to understand the phenomenon of over-tourism and what it actually means to people living in outside of Europe or the European Union. And I believe that we should indeed learn our lessons from the cases that we are seeing, where it is being very conflictual and very negative interpreted, and learn from that also for countries where it might be perceived differently. And if, for instance, in Ghana, and I have not been to the country, so I want to be very careful with my judgment, but if in that country it is being promoted, I do understand, because tourism is often seen as a tool for economic growth, as a tool for economic income. And in those countries, as for instance Ghana, it is really important still, because that's what's needed. And tourism can be a tool for that. But again, what we are learning is that it should be implemented in a sustainable way, in a way that it's well governed, that it's well managed, and not getting out of hand, because otherwise that will be a future problem for Ghana and other countries as well. So that's that's my thought on that. Sorry that it was more than 2 sentences.
No, thank you, Eva. Great answer. Let's move to G. Khalifa. For a webinar of this nature, it is essential to invite representatives from both the tourism authorities responsible for the destination and representatives of the protesters. Facilitating such a community dialogue can help bridge communication gaps and foster mutual understanding. Academic experts can moderate the discussion, ensuring a structured conversation and providing analytical insights to help reach a common ground. Absolutely right. That's clear. Yeah. The intention of the current webinar was to show, to give you some insights in let me say, in a situation which is analyzed in a scientific way, where we try to create a better understanding about a phenomenon. But obviously, that what the destinations have to do is to bring together tourism authorities responsible for the destination development on one hand and the protesters on the other hand. This eventually could also be the next step. But one result of the analysis is that especially the protesters, we have to integrate in the discussion. We have to we need a better understanding of their motivations. Yeah, I also on the Canary Island learned that ecological aspects are so important because of a historical development of the islands. Yeah? Antonio and especially Carmelo, they were talking about that. Yeah? I can confirm this, what they told me. Yeah? So they they have a deep, let me say, desire, yeah, to keep from an ecological points, the islands in a safe way. There are many reasons for that. And only later you understand that this is influencing that much also the discussion. Yeah? It's not only about water and water aspects or other kind of pollution, but it's probably then linking this in an easier way to the tourism development issues. So thank you very much for the questions. You are invited to make another question, but I would come back to Jafar Jafari. He was asking how we can avoid the phenomenon. When I listen all these discussions here, I have the impression that these protests are moving forward politicians to create a basis for solutions. But we also heard that there is a lot of chaos. Yeah? Antonio was mentioning this. Yeah? So in a couple of months, you cannot solve the problem. So politicians have to clear communicate that the solution is not easy and that you need not only short-term solutions but also middle and long-term ranges and solutions. So it is important to communicate in the right way, in a very responsible way. We cannot solve issues between April 20 and October 20, obviously. So my impression is that a lot of discussion is now starting, and at the same in the Alps. Yeah? So politicians react. I would say the protests, they were, it was fine to have them. Yeah? So it was good to know about people who are interested to protest, yeah? About certain developments. So how we can avoid, let me say it in a hypothetical way, I would say it is good that we have overtourism, because only when people start to protest, the whole tourism system is reacting and creating new ways of sustainable tourism development. Antonio, a short comment.
Just one sentence. I agree that the protests have some effects, and they have a very interesting effects because it seems that the managers, the politicians, they only work actually on the long-term problems if the problem itself is an electoral problem. And this protest of last year contributed to make at least two of the problems, to make them electoral things for the election of 2027. This is the housing. They are running now to do houses because this will be electoral topic, and the wastewaters in the sea, in the ocean. This will be electoral topic as well. In this sense, there is a contribution from the protest.
Yeah, thank you. So just summarizing, I would say that what others also mentioned before, we need discussions about new tourism models and developments, just redistributing responsibilities, resources, and rights, yeah, even rights. Yeah? We are talking about the political governance. We are talking about democracies. It has a lot to do with the question of human rights and rights as a whole. I have to say thank you very much to the podium, and I give back to Kazem and Jafar.
Thank you, Harold. I see a lot of discussion and the questions from the chat. Actually, I see some of the people who ask questions. They are able to talk and open their camera if they wish. It was a very insightful debate. What I learned, if I quickly pay back the lessons that I learned before Jafar start the concluding remarks, is that I think the issue of over tourism is a phenomenon, or is something that we have to see it in different point of views. And maybe we have to involve some DMOs to see that in a destination level, the issue of over tourism, is it the communication issue between the authorities or the tourism planners that they do not give the floor for local communities to talk, and it is brought in front of tourists, or it is a real issue of the destination capacity that tourism compete with local community in terms of the resources in the destination. So I feel that there is a miscommunication and misinterpretation of tourism. So is tourism responsible, or it is the destination management? I think the phenomenon is going to get more and more complex, and I'm sure we cannot conclude it in one webinar. So that is a good reason that I would like to invite you to continue this discussion. And the other thing is that if we have different examples, and we have the experience from different destinations that they could solve, we might be able to share this and benefit from the experiences in the past. Thank you very much. And I pass it on to Jafar for the concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Qasim. Thank you very much, panel members, for a very engaging discussion on the subjects of over tourism. I have a question myself, and I don't know if the answer would be coming from the panel or not. Do we know the protesters according to their age? Are they younger or older or all over? My guess is that they are younger. I would like somebody who may have done observation on that or may have a data on it to confirm or deny this. And then I have a follow-up question for you. A number of cities were mentioned suffering from over-tourism. Amsterdam was one of them. Barcelona was one of them. So I want to ask a hypothetical question. Now we have a group of protesters in Amsterdam who don't like tourism. They go for a tour to Barcelona, for example, and the protest is going on at the same time in Barcelona. Do they join the tour or do they join the protest? I know you may think this is funny, but it's a reality that we have to think about it. Do any one of you have made observation on age, and whether, my second question, would they join the tour or the protest as tourists?
Yeah, thank you. These are great Jafari questions. Yeah. But my impression, Antonio, probably you can say something about the age, also Katrin and Jakob. I guess that we see many layers of societies, older people and younger people as well. This is people who are working in different areas, not only in tourism now. Yeah? So probably at the beginning, tourism employees were protesting against missing infrastructures. Yeah? But later, the movement became one in this, I would say, in the center of society. Yeah? So in the middle of society, we have different, not only young people or not only older people, but from different layers. Antonio, probably something about that. What is your impression?
Well, I agree. There was a mixture, not only young people. We always think they are only very young people, but I was in the protest of 20th October here in Gran Canaria at the same time as you were in the protest in Tenerife, the 20th October, and you saw there was a varied profile. Maybe a little bit more younger people, but very, very mixed. And what I didn't see is tourism workers. I didn't see many tourism workers. More public workers or unemployed or other sectors, no?
Yeah, it would be interesting now, and that's the reason why Katrin also presented this protest culture as one of the bases, theoretical basis for the discussion. Yeah, it would be interesting to know how protests dynamize, yeah, over the time. Yeah. The mixture of protesters April 20 was a different one of October 20. So more and more the protests are becoming, let me say, in a way, political protests or protests against the political governance, protests against social imbalances and social inequalities, and not only and not anymore exclusively about tourism. So tourism is a catalyst. That's what we now learn and can be a catalyst. But this awareness we need also for the political class. They have to manage this as early they can, just in order to create not only create a discussion about the future tourism, but also try to understand why imbalances are becoming a critical issue for the whole society. So we have more and more also polarized societies, and over-tourism is integrated in this discussion about polarized societies, especially in democracies. And this has to do a lot with the big crisis we have, the climate crisis, the economic crisis, the health crisis, the pandemic. So many crises are creating, let me say, polarized societies. And over-tourism today, as mentioned more often in this webinar, is not anymore the same of the over-tourism discussion we had before the pandemic. Yeah. Back to the second question of Professor Jafar Jafari. This is a great question. Yeah? I'm not sure, but definitely people, societies of these big cities are highly sensibilized. So I guess that they would have a big understanding of the protests in Barcelona. They wouldn't be happy just to be tourists alone. So I guess that societies change now over time. The more they see protests, I also today showed this picture from the Alps, too much. Written on the snow. Yeah? So all the inhabitants, many inhabitants being on the slopes and the pistes, they see that. Obviously, they are influenced by this discussion. So the tourist experience of locals is not anymore the same as it was in the past. I'm sure that they would, let me say, probably not participating in the protests, but they would have a lot of positive emotions for the ideas protesters are bringing on the roads and the streets. This is my impression. Eventually, someone, Carmelo or Eva, would add to that. Eva.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to answer that question from my perspective as well. And I experienced in my own research that some residents actually do reflect on their own travel behavior. And I have lovely quotes that I've presented in other occasions where people said, like, for me, it's okay if they are misbehaving because, I'm also just a chaotic tourist who annoys the people when I'm in Barcelona. So for some people, it actually helps to create tolerance towards tourists, to reflect on, I'm one of them when I'm traveling, and it is difficult to navigate around in a different culture. And if you're not used to biking lanes, as it is the case in Copenhagen, yes, you probably stand on such biking lanes. And the other way, when you're in Barcelona or in Amsterdam, you also have very important biking lanes, so they're just biking all over. And when you're then in Barcelona, there are some societal and cultural rules that you're not aware of. So for some people, it actually helps to reflect on their own travel behavior to create tolerance and awareness, which is the beauty of focus groups, because then I don't have to point it out, but they are exchanging the experiences themselves. So they have those aha moments while listening to others reflecting on it. And also what Harold just said is that it gives a point of reference. So also in many talks I heard like, well, as long as it's not as bad and that's like if I talk to people in Utrecht, which is a smaller city in the Netherlands, which is growing in popularity, people always say like, well, I'm fine with a tourist as long as it's not as bad as in Amsterdam. If you talk to people in Amsterdam, they might refer to Barcelona. If Barcelona, they might refer to Venice. So we do have, due to this very threatening story that is told in media, a point of reference. And if people then travel to such places and they experience it themselves, they're like, okay, I do not want this for my home. So it creates a new experience and point of reference and something they are scared of having in their own backyard. So I think that's also a very important point of traveling and experiencing overtourism and then bringing that in your, as part of a souvenir, unfortunately, back home and having this fear and this lens of like, okay, is it happening in my city? What am I observing?
Yes, actually, this is a very good point because tourists are also human people. It's not a matter of making money out of tourists. And sometimes tourists also want us have solidarity with the local populations. What is striking is that even though we have had a lot of protests, tourists still come to the islands, to the destinations. You don't see that they restrain from traveling, even though there have been a lot of news pointing out that the residents are against tourists and so on. So they persist in going to the destinations because they want to stay in the destinations. And this is something very interesting because tourists, maybe we don't have a question if we are treating tourists as human people and giving them what they want. They may complain about these high prices for hotels, the treatment they have in the queues, and all these bad services that are at destinations because of massification. So, as you said, there has been some other ways of building this up and turning around tourism in some other ways that is more friendly to all the human statements that are around tourism. It's a system, it's not just making money. Yes. Okay.
Well, if I may, I'm very pleased to hear your responses and especially to learn that those who protest become better tourists themselves. And that is a very good statement. But something I would like to also emphasize based on what I heard today and everybody did, I think it was Eva who said this is a Eurocentric presentation, and indeed it is a Eurocentric. Other parts of the world do not look at tourism the way we do. Africa would not, a good part of Asia would not, a good part of Latin America would not. So we have to recognize that our discussion is more intellectual and Eurocentric. In any discussion, when we are talking about over-tourism, at least four groups need to be recognized. One is the host, the other one is the guest, the third one is the stakeholders, and the fourth one is the government. Whose voices did we hear in this webinar? Basically, the voices of the host, the residents. Did we hear the voice of the tourist? Did we hear the voice of the government? Did we hear the voice of the stakeholders? If we really want to have a balanced discussion, we have all these voices to be heard. And I'm an anthropologist myself, and I'm also very sensitive to the host community. So I appreciate the focus that we give to the host community. But if we want a dialogue, all the stakeholders, all the four groups need to be involved. Governments has an entirely different idea about over-tourism. They are talking about quantity most of the time. Not all government, but many of them are talking about arrivals, increasing the number of arrivals. Pay attention to the annual report that ministers of tourism in the developing countries they give. They're always they're always proud to say that our arrival increased by 10%, by 5%. That is achievement for them. So we have to think about our Eurocentric treatment of the subject and start thinking about those voices that were not represented in this dialogue. Uh, Again, I'm very sensitive myself to the host voices. I can clearly see that there are places that the voice local people may not protest. Do you think Las Vegas is going to have people coming to the streets against tourism? I don't think so. Doesn't Las Vegas have over-tourism? Plenty of over-tourism. So it's the host. The tolerance of the host has to be understood. And we always talk about the environment, which has a capacity, the supply, which has a capacity. Well, the tolerance has a body, and a tolerance can accommodate. So we have to figure out what is the tolerance of the local community towards tourism. Some hosts are upset with a few tourists, and some destinations can take more of it. So I think we have to go to this four-part relationship of host, guest, stakeholders, and government, and bring all these voices together in order to make sense from it all, but in my opinion. And I have proposed such a survey to be done of surveying all the four groups I mentioned, but do them year after year, the same group, the same questions repeated every year. And then at the end, we can compare to see which voices are changing, which tolerances are changing, which views are changing. Sometimes the problem is not with the tourists, the problem is with the policies, with the stakeholders, so on and so forth. So we have to know all of this in order to bring this over-tourism discussion to a balance. So again, I want to go back to Eva's comment that this was a Eurocentric discussion, and hopefully we can have other type of discussions on over-tourism. There are many countries that they would love to have the problem of Barcelona. But of course, that is not a reality. One final point I would like to make.
But it is a reality, Jaffa, of international tourism. It is a fact that Europe is the most important destination on a worldwide scale. We have this problem in the cities and more also in the rural areas of Europe. So from that point of view, I think, as we stated, it is a Eurocentric discussion. But I guess that the over-tourism phenomenon is more and more also coming also from other regions of the world. In Asia, in China, we have overcrowding phenomenon, and partially this is becoming an over-tourism phenomenon. In countries such as Vietnam, for example, the discussion is starting. So I don't think that this is a phenomenon just remaining in Europe. Others should learn from Europe, but it is a fact that Europe is the museum of the world, and all the Asian and American people and the whole world wants to see Europe. So we need solutions, especially in Europe, and hopefully others can then learn from this overcrowding phenomenon, which more and more is becoming an over-tourism phenomenon. I liked very much your focus on the host voices and that we have to include also the guests. This is very important. So the webinar of today is dedicated to protesters. Protesters are a small piece, as we saw, a very small piece of the host communities. but it would be very, very interesting to go on a next level of research and include tourists visiting the destinations. But the main message, in my opinion, my motivation to organize this webinar today was to show to the destinations that they have to start the discussion with the protesters. Yeah? This is a fact that they do not discuss with the protesters. Yeah? And this is incredible, in my opinion. Yeah? They are becoming an important stakeholder. Yeah? And therefore, DMO managers, they should start actively discuss overtourism as a chance for transformation and not as a barrier for the further development of a classical business model, which probably will not anymore function in the future.
Definitely, this is the bouncing path for the further discussion. One of the conclusions that we made, and I think Harold, you made it yourself. I think I wrote it correctly. You said protest is good, and I agree with you. It awakens the subject. Yeah. We talk about it, but my suggestion is that if one day Barcelona comes with a solution, or Amsterdam comes for a solution, that strategy is not going to be applicable somewhere else. Each destination needs to come up with its own strategy. Why? Because the host is different in every destination. The culture of the host is different in every destination. The history of the host is different, and so on and so forth. Some societies are open societies. Some societies are closed society. A closed society has no tolerance for tourism, of course. So we have to recognize that we should not read the articles. Barcelona finally has managed to deal with over-tourism. Let's do the model of Barcelona. No, this is not going to work because that model is just for Barcelona.
Yeah. Great.
Hazem, back to you.
Thank you very much. I can see this debate doesn't end. So, and I would like to open the floor for more discussions with more stakeholders. As all of you, I think, agree, we need to invite a representative from different parties and stakeholders. But still the question is that the matter of over-tourism is the matter of tourism industry, communication between different parts of a destination, or it's simply a matter of a zoning. Maybe over-tourism just happen in a special zone within a destination. Some part of destination might not have over-tourism, and this is again the issue of the management. And as you mentioned, Jafar, we cannot generalize we can't find a general solution. So these are the people who need to identify the problem and bring up the solution and discussions. Thank you very much. I can see we are behind our schedule, and still many people are with us. Over 30 people are in the Zoom, and we have other people also watching the webinar on YouTube. The recording of the webinars, all SCoT webinars are in our YouTube library. I would like to invite you to watch the recordings, and if you have any question, please forward it to us, and we would love to communicate with you and the speakers of today, and we promise to continue this discussion. Harold and his team brought a very hot topic in the first webinar of SCoT 2025. Thank you very much. And I would like to end today's webinar here. We are going to watch a quick video and see you off. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then this tells you all you need to know. The United Canary Islands will never be defeated, the crowd shouts. To both ear and eye, it's the language of battle. the Canarians have had enough.
The actual system doesn't work anymore. It's not useful for Canarian people, and they're losing more than they win.
It is not only the tourism projects, it is the queues, it is the precarious work, it is the unemployment, it is the weariness of the people who are tired of it.
Surprise, surprise, the Canary Islands are much more than just tourism. In fact, the much more, things like housing, water supplies, environmental landscape, is said to be so degraded that people are at risk of poverty and social exclusion.
We have the territory oversaturated with constructions, and also constructions that are being totally destroyed, with no use within the tourism industry. And what we're doing is speculating about the land, leaving the natural areas totally unprotected.
Activists claim that a luxury hotel being built here is on public maritime land. The developer says its planning licence complies with the law and has accused the activists of misinformation. This week, they jumped a fence to sit in front of the mechanical digger.
I don't think local people, whether it's on the Canaries or elsewhere, want tourists to go away. They don't want the planes to stop bringing people in. They just want more sustainable tourism. They want to know that their infrastructure can be protected, that there can be sustainable growth, and that tourists who are coming in respect their local land and help them live their lives.
Tourism accounts for roughly 40% of the local economy here. Last year, official data shows that nearly 14 million people visited the archipelago, which is inhabited by 2 million people.
We can't cope with all this. It's too much for such a small island. We also fight for decent housing, not to have to pay excessively high rents, just to be on our own land.
These people in wheelchairs are on their 10th day of hunger strike. However weak they may feel, the strength in their message couldn't be clearer.
Thank you again, and we would like to open the cameras if you are willing to have a group photo. You can turn on your cameras, those who are still here, and let's have a group photo together. Perfect. Wow. Okay, we are going to have a photo with big smiles. Thank you. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
See you again in next month's SCoT webinar. Please look and refer to SCoT website for the next month's volume.
Thank you very much for such interesting
Thank you.
webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.